The Wisdom of Gore, Episode 3, The Dangers of Matriarchy and Patriarchy. The Gore series is infamous for its portrayal of women's inferiority compared to that of men. It does not matter to critics that in the second novel of the series, Norman gives matriarchy a true examination. In our society today, we are bombarded by the fourth-wave feminist view that men, if not inherently evil by nature, are molded into being evil by the patriarchy that controls all of our lives. The feminist belief is that patriarchy will mold all men and women to accept its yoke and never question the moral paradigm. And with that goes the assumption of the lower place of women within patriarchy's professed natural order. Gore, with its red-tunicked warriors battling over the right to own a woman, its slave trade and sexual dynamics of domination of the inferior partner, who is usually a woman, is what fourth-wave feminists would claim is everything wrong with the world today. Well, balderdash. Norman's Counter-Earth may have been made famous for its portrayal of women as being disempowered and mere vehicles for the satiation of men's pleasure, but the truth of the Gorean matter is far different. In the second novel of the series, Norman gives women true equality. He crafts a city called Tharna, and its females are the nobility and rulers of the city. Further, the ruler of Tharna, the Tatrix, has the power of life and death over all men in her city, be they homeborn or traveling strangers. It matters not. Any man that walks into the domain of Tharna is subject to the will of the Tatrix and bound by the laws of Tharna, which by Gorean standards are strange customs. In short, Norman's going to show us that a woman can be just as egotistical, short-sighted, selfish, avaricial, and evil as a man. The novel begins with Charles Cabot wrestling with being back upon Earth. He can pass among civilized society, but having been exposed to the barbarous world of Gore, he finds civility and its customs constraining of his, quote, natural manly urges, end quote. At least natural as he feels them to be. Keep this first point in mind, please, as we progress through the lecture. Charles Cabot, having been raised on Earth, where evolution and culture have not been interfered with by an outside force, i.e. the Priest Kings, decides he finds barbarity to be more natural. Now, if Earth is truly under the sway of patriarchy, could Charles have come to such a conclusion by comparing it to Gore? Wouldn't he merely see the two worlds as being on the same system of ethics, yet following it to different degrees of extreme? Put another way, when we speak of a religion, we speak of those that are moderate observers of the faith and those that are fundamentalists or extremists. If Gore and Earth were on the same patriarchal cult stream, wouldn't Charles simply refer to them as being more or less devoted to those ideas? Instead, Charles constantly narrates how lifeless, unmanly, and cowardly Earth is compared to Gore. Through Charles' musings, we see that Norman is postulating two completely different ethical paradigms, and that Charles finds the constraints of civilization to chafe at his inward feeling of what it would mean to be free or manly. And if that strikes you a bit like Milton's Lucifer, it should. From Paradise Lost, Book 1, verses 251 to 263. Infernal world, and thou profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. What matter where if I still be the same, and what I should be, all but less than he, whom thunder hath made greater? Here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition though in hell, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. The preceding is essentially the world of Gore's ethic. Might does not make right. Might is right. The horrible conditions of the world and its scientific experimental prison planet constraints can be made into joyous revels if you but accept the horrors of constant warfare, lawlessness, and slavery. Eat well, rut well, and slay well, for tomorrow you may be dead. Or in Gorean, tonight we shall get drunk. Well, Earth doesn't work like that. Gore takes hedonism to its nth degree, but on Earth we suspect that tomorrow will almost always be like today. And that's because of civilization's constraints on our behavior. And we're correct to assume so. Barring natural disasters, diseases, or a state of war between nations, Life on Earth has become very predictable and stable, unlike life on Gore. Life on Earth has order, rules, a predictable chain of social interaction. Earth is a heaven compared to the hell of Gore. And like Satan believing that hell might be better than heaven, he rebelled against. So Tarl Cabot's about to find out that getting your wish for a more exciting Gorian life may not actually be in your best interest. The second novel is called Outlaw of Gore, because when Tarl awakens upon Gore this time, he has no station in Gore's rigid case structure. He is told by an initiate, a man who once fought with Tarl at the Siege of Ar, that the Priest Kings have decided to punish him. His great love, Telena, has been taken away from him and sold into slavery. The homestone of Koroba has been captured, its people scattered, and all Goreans have been ordered not to aid him upon pain of death. The initiate begs Tarl to throw himself upon his sword and thus escape the suffering the Priest Kings have in store for him. When Tarl asks the man why, he replies that he was a warrior with Tarl when they besieged the city of Ar in the former novel. And his respect for Tarl is so great that he is willing to pay the price of warning him of what the Priest Kings intend. I'm sorry, I may have made that clear. The man actually fought against Tarl at Ar, if I remember correctly. The price the Priest Kings will demand is death, and through their strange powers of technology, they slay him in Tarl's arms. In gratitude, Tarl buries the man and places an engraving on the stones that reads, "I am a man of glorious Ar." A final act of defiance against the Priest Kings, as even the mention of Ar might not be the best thing to utter. How's that throne in the city of Dis sitting for you now, Mr. Cabot? Some introductory chapters follow, and they're full of pleasant filler, but filler nonetheless, until Tarl reaches the city of Tharna. In Tharna, Cabot notices that the normal Gorian order has been perverted. Men, and only men, are slaves. All the citizens wear gray rather than the traditionally colored tunics of Gore, to denote that there are no castes within the wall of Tharna. The women of the city go about wearing silver masks and having authority. At first this seems weird to Tarl, but not harmful. Hey, when in Rome. We read, however, that the Matriarchy is extremely harmful. Tarl ends up framed in a conspiracy to oust the Tatrics. He is innocent, but that matters not to his female judges. Then a single sentence Tarl utters has unknown meaning to him, but is incredibly insulting to the Tharnans, and the Tatrix throws him into the mines for it. There, in truly horrid conditions, we read that the mines are not designed to work for resources, but to grind down and dishearten the male population. And it gets worse. For whether a man is a mining slave or not, in Tharna, all males must compete in lethal gladiatorial games once every 5 years. Now, the perceptive amongst you may have already asked yourself the question I did when I read this. How can any city maintain a population base if it's killing off a large number of its male population every 5 years, and visitors that arrive there are captured and sold into slavery? What news or rumors of the place spread about? Well, as in many fantasy worlds, economic and logistical realities are largely ignored by the author. But those realities are not why Norman is writing the city this way. He is writing it to make a point about power in the state, and how the state will always find someone to oppress, to distract its citizens from its tyranny. What takes place in Tharna is only slightly more extreme than what happens in the other Gorian city-states. In many ways, the only novel thing about it is its gladiatorial games, and that all the men must participate, rather than just the slaves hacking at one another with short swords. Eventually, Tarl escapes. God, it's nice having plot armor. On the back of a giant hawk, and he captures Lara the Tatrix. He flies away with her and attempts to return her for the freedom of the men he was enslaved with while in the mines. This does not go according to plan, and it is revealed that in her absence, Dorna the Proud, rival to Lara, has taken the Tatrix's position and arranged for her to be murdered or enslaved at the rendezvous. Fortunately, Tarl saves Lara and flies away with her again. Now what happens next is highly predictable fare in the stories of sword and sorcery. Spending time with Tarl, Lara sees the error of her ways and submits to him. She falls in love with Tarl and the two of them share a tryst. It is tempting to see this transformation as being entirely the result of Tarl Cabot's skill as a lover. But in fact, Norman is presenting us a character arc for Lara, who up until now has actually been in the position of being a spoiled child. Oh, she's been a very powerful child, but a protected, spoiled, and petulant child nonetheless. And Lara is not that different in presentation from the way Talena was presented to us in the first novel. A woman of privilege who assumes that men will simply obey her, and she will always have her way. A woman with little concern for others or their needs. In short, a stunted adult development. Norman is trying to show us that for his feminist heroes, he agrees with the following two philosophers to some extent. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage, Anais Nin. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman, Simone de Beauvoir. Both Talena and Lara begin to become fully actualized adults when they are faced with adversity and find the courage to conquer their former limited way of thinking. It is very hard to catch this amongst the sexual fetishizing and giant bird battles, but it is there. Next, the lovers return to Tharna and free the city. The order of female dominance is smashed, though Lara is restored as the Tatrix, and we are treated to a scene of the victorious men making the women serve, dance, and one would assume sleep with them. One of the men remarks to Tarl that he should not be surprised that the women, once lords of the city, are able to dance the slave dances by instinct. Quoting the book, "They are women who are natural slaves." End quote. Tarl, we can sense, is not sure he entirely agrees with this typically Gorian sentiment. After all, Talena is not what Tarl would consider a slave. Nor is Lara. Sadly, this is not a sentiment that only appears in the fictional world of Gore. A belief in the inferiority and therefore rightful subjugation of women has been with us long before MGTOW became a buzzword. The word and works of the Lord is quite clear, that women are made either to be wives or prostitutes. Martin Luther, a reformer of the church, 1483 to 1546, Works 12.94. The second duty of the wife is constant obedience and subjection. John Dodd, A Plain and Familiar Exposition of the Ten Commandments, Puritan Guidebook, first published 1603. The root of the masculine is stronger and of the feminine weaker. The sun is a governing planet to certain planets, while the moon borrows her light from the sun and is less or weaker. Joseph Smith, founder of LDS movement, 1805-1844, History of the Church, Volume 5, page 211. The Battle of the Sexes is one of the central themes in Norman's Counter-Earth Chronicles. I apologize, I'm having some speech problems today. I do not recommend Norman's surface solutions, as living Gorians do, but Norman has hit upon something that flies in the face of the modern trend to make fictional female heroines better than their male counterparts. This need to show that women can exist without any male support has given us characters in cinema and fiction that are not only badly written but poorly received. And this movement, born of the frustration of not being regarded as being as valuable men, is birthed from comments such as, "Whatever women do, they must do twice as well as a man and be thought half as good. Luckily, this is not difficult." Charlotte Whitten. Sure, he was great, but don't forget that Ginger Rogers did everything he did, backwards and in high heels. A Frank and Ernest cartoon. And do not misunderstand me. I am not claiming that in our history that women did not have a socially inferior position. What I am pointing out is that though there is a common accusation amongst fourth-wave feminists that men are out to oppress them to maintain power, it is simply not true. Even in Norman's Gore, we see, here in this second novel, a city-state run by a woman. A city-state that even after the male revolution takes place, maintains her position. And specifically, the former ruler that had oppressed them, Lara, who now has fought for their freedom, becomes their new ruler. People crave stability and order so that they can plan their lives, and in our past, that was most easily accomplished by letting men be the dominant sex. Technology present on Earth, that is lacking on Gore, has changed that equation, and we are in the process of now figuring out how to best use our human resources from both of the sexes. This is such an obvious conclusion that even in the fictional world of Gore, Norman, supposedly a virulent misogynist, shows us the city of Tharna keeping the female leader tradition. I think that a good analogy from the real world would be how the British loved and adored Queen Elizabeth II, Victoria, and the current Queen. God save her, by the way. and accusations that women can never share the limelight with men are shot down by comments from real-world heroes and women such as Ginger Rogers, who said about her and Fred Astaire's working relationship, "That's pure bunk. I adored Fred. We were good friends. Our only problem is that we never aspired to be any kind of team. We didn't want to be Abbott and Costello. We thought of ourselves as individuals. We didn't intend to be another frickin' frack," smiling after a pause. "But it happened anyway, didn't it? And I'll be forever grateful that it did." Ginger Rogers. And though we can see from many of Fred's letters that he hated the idea of being paired with anyone, he was a bit of an egomaniac. He gave Ginger Rogers the kind of praise a man of his time normally reserves for other men. The following are quotes of Fred Astaire about Ginger Rogers. "Ginger was brilliantly effective. She made everything work for her. Actually, she made things very fine for both of us, and she deserves most of the credit for our success. She's the hardest working actress I ever knew. She had guts." I bring up these quotes from this popular working relationship because often Norman Gore is accused of positing that men and women can only cooperate if the men are abusive. The casual reader sees the slavery and the beatings and ends up agreeing with Margaret Atwood. Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them. But in Outlaw of Gore, Norman demonstrates the issue of violence between the sexes is not one of genetics, but purely of social conditioning. He in effect agrees with feminists when they tout out rhetoric about re-educating men to be less violent. His disagreement with them is that this is the argument of a culture that has the technology and the cultural mores to even allow such a question. And in the ages of barbarity, it simply could not have been asked due to the needs of the culture to survive. So in closing, what is the wisdom of Gore trying to teach us about the events that take place during Outlaw of Gore? First, any social order can be corrupted by individual human greed. The troubles in the novel come largely from Dorna's usurpation of Lara. Second, being female is not inferior to being male, but being female does mean that certain professions or actions will be more difficult, at least physically, than they will be for males. Lara and Dorna cannot physically match their male counterparts in primitive battle, and must lead male soldiers rather than enter that fray themselves. In later novels, Norman will expose his readers to warrior women called Panther Girls, who can match men blow for blow, but it is clear these are exceptional warriors rather than the commonly encountered ones. Third, any system of governance or social contract that ignores the needs of one of the two human sexes is doomed to failure. Just as we saw R fall in the first novel because of the obsessions of power lust of corrupt men, in the second novel we see Tharna nearly fall because of the power lust of its ruling women. Only a social system that cares for each gender's needs can ultimately survive. Unless you think that's conjecture on my part, let me quote Tarl from the novel. In chapter 6, Tarl remarks, "I thought that much of the barbarity of Gore might perhaps be traced to this foolish suppression of the fair sex, whose gentleness and intelligence might have made such a contribution to the softening of her harsh ways." Hardly the words of a misogynist, don't you think? Fourth, the wisdom of Gore is trying to convey to us that to be in a possession of true character and virtue. Let me repeat that. The wisdom of Gore is trying to convey to us that to be in possession of true character and virtue will help avoid many of the problems that society faces. For if problems arise from individual greed and failing, then naturally they are best combated by encouraging individual virtue and accomplishment. Think of the defiance of the priest kings that Tarl and the initiate engage in early on. And also to quote Tarl again when he encounters a peasant who's afraid to the point of weeping. "Pity humiliates both him who pities and him who is pitied. According to the Gorean way, one may love, but one may not pity." There is a daring to the Gorean ethic that we in the real world should probably adopt. To live as we feel is most proper without thought to the disdain of others, and to treat others with the highest virtue that we can. This is part of what I feel Tarl finds to be unmanly on earth, that this does not happen. He does not truly lament the sword fights and monsters of Gore. He laments not being able to expect the very best of others. Whereas on Gore, his fellow warriors and compatriots all expect the very best of him, and this expectation carries with it a reciprocity that has given Gorian society an esteem in Tarl's mind. A Gorian who gives his word will keep it. A Gorian who accepts the care of another will never harm them. This same expectation of trust is lacking in our real world, which is why we have so many laws and punishments to try to mitigate it. Granted, in the real world, those seem to have proven to be the more effective answer. But the lament that men will not aspire to be moral and virtuous unless a society enculturates them to do so is a very telling observation that should give us all pause, particularly as we look at the political movements of our time and see how they have largely rejected reason in favor of emotion. Outlaw of Gar has a fifth lesson to teach us. When a love affair runs its course, do not attempt to lengthen it. Part in good company and with good intentions. When Lara lets Tarl go to pursue his mission against the Priest Kings and fight Telena, she does not drop into jealousy or a fit of pique. She accepts that Tarl was never wholly hers, and that she does owe him for being the catalyst of her own growth. Without Tarl, she never would have learned how to truly love. This may seem like a pat literary device, but I believe there's actually more to it. Now, amongst living Gorians, there's a saying that men embody strength and women embody love. That would make the case, as Tarl does, that it's actually women who form the moral backbone of a society. Now, what I mean by that is that the expectations that women place upon men from the time mothers raise their sons to the expectations of the women who marry them, women and their love influences almost all male decision-making. Men strive to make land safe for women. Men sacrifice to make wealth available for women. In a society, the work of men, in a very real sense, is always done for the benefit of women. So if a woman does not know how to truly love, a love that does not enable, but encourages and challenges, then the men will grow up warped. We could say that in the first novel we see some signs of this with the assassin that Tarl has to conquer. Likewise, if a woman grows accustomed to demanding men not be men, but treats them as chattel or even despises them, as the women of Tharna have, then the men will become resentful and, as we can see in the Revolution of Tharna, come into danger of being everything the women fear. There's a very wise warning in this observation. Now, as I write this, I'm also reading a sci-fi series with a matriarchy called the Pelbar Cycle. In the current novel, there's a scene in which the opening chapter where a female character nearly beats a young boy to death because he wrecked a model she was holding. The society of that novel largely dismisses the act since the boy is only a male. And this ends up precipitating a rebellion. How could it not? In our world, women were willing to be beaten to get the right to vote. No society will last long on its own by oppressing half its population. I worry that in our modern age, there's a growing pressure to dehumanize men in the minds of women. Back in 2014, a 22-year-old woman went on her YouTube channel and proposed to make the world perfect by reducing the male population by 90%. Her internet handle was that of the femtheist. She had a momentary spike in popularity as radio shows and other commentators spoke about her view. But it wasn't new, because in 1967, the same year that Norman copyrights Outlaw of Gore, a feminist figure named Valerie Solanas published a book called The Scum Manifesto, in which she advocated the complete eradication of the male sex, blaming it for the entirety of the world's problems. The manifesto has been reprinted over 100 times and is available in 13 languages. Attributions and quotations by Solanas make it unclear if the work is satire, as she has sometimes claimed, or in fact her real belief. But whatever the belief for Solanas is, for feminist activist Julie Bindel, the Scum Manifesto is apparently inspiration. Bindel wants to intern men in concentration camps for the good of women and reduce the male population. She advocates preventing men from not only having any political power and freedom of movement, but also no freedom to defend themselves, or to even have wanking off material. She claims that she was joking and that men are being too sensitive about her remarks. Yet she recently penned an article wondering if now that science can make sperm out of stem cells, if men are a necessity. And she's not alone, because not joking about doing that very thing, eliminating men, is Sally Miller Gearhart. And Gearhart is a professor at San Francisco State University, a feminist activist, and a sci-fi author. Gearhart has won other women over to her idea. And I quote from her essay, "The future, if there is one, is female." 1. Every culture must begin to affirm the female future. 2. Species responsibility must be returned to women in every culture. And 3. The proportion of men must be reduced to and maintained at approximately 10% of the human race. Regretfully, Tharna might not only be a thing of fiction. Norman was very wise in his depiction of Tharna as being a culture dominated by women that is just as dysfunctional as the normal Gorian cultures that are dominated by men. And I believe this to have been intentional. And the subtle appeal to balance power and resources between the sexes was not lost on me. As a woman, you're better off in life earning your own money. You couldn't prevent your husband from leaving you or taking another wife, but you could have some dignity if you didn't have to beg him for financial support. Ayin Hirsi Ali, Infidel.